Some thoughts on the recent conservative attacks on the federal judiciary. For background, I'm not just a comedian. I also graduated from Georgetown Law School, top 100% in my class, not to brag. But it started sort of with J.D. Vance saying, in effect, that federal judges have no right to question or restrict legitimate actions by the executive. Now, J.D. Vance, like Ted Cruz, like Josh Hawley, are incredibly intellectual people, very smart, very accomplished, went to the best law schools in the country and succeeded there, thrived there. So I'm sure what J.D. Vance would say, if confronted with this, would say, no, I said legitimate executive actions. But what he's doing is obviously suggesting, creating a picture of lawless judges who, when they question the Trump administration, are violating the Constitution and are out of order and are reckless, renegade judges. That's the impression they want to create, because semantics-wise, he could make a claim that, no, I didn't say unconstitutional actions, but what he's doing intentionally is creating a sort of picture of, when the president does something legitimate, a judge would have to be sort of just out of their mind or, impeachable to question it or restrict it. Now, Democrats, for the both sides folks, have often criticized judges for their decisions. Things like sending, when you send an abortion pill case to some dipshit in Texas and he strikes it down. There's hemming and hawing and complaining legitimately, but then it gets appealed. That's the process. Democrats don't really come out and say, this judge is illegitimate, you can't do this, this judge has no right. They say, this judge is wrong, let's appeal. Now, what Trump is doing, what him and his minions learned in the first term, was that the judiciary was sort of the bulwark against a lot of what he did. Now, they stuffed the Supreme Court because Democrats didn't take it seriously and didn't really consider that part of Hillary Clinton's campaign. So now we have an incredibly right-wing Supreme Court for the next 20 to 30 years. That's why now President Trump has basically immunity from most things, because Democrats didn't take it as seriously as Republicans. Part of that is, something in this country is, when you're the underdog or when you're losing, you're more motivated than when maybe you have the majority. So with things like abortion rights being the law of the land for 50 years, Republicans dug in and fought tooth and nail, and many Democrats and independents and Republicans took for granted those rights and sort of just assumed they'd always be there. But back to the judiciary. I saw Scott Jennings, sort of CNN's most notorious D-bag, last night during a discussion of this executive versus judiciary debate. And he said, among one of his flippant, smug, smarmy comments was, who elected this federal judge anyway? Who elected him? Nobody. Okay. And that's another sort of dog whistle. The same way J.D. Vance can argue what he said is correct. It's the impression that you're putting it out. Nobody elected the federal judge. Oh, I guess that means we should listen to Donald Trump. Except the judiciary has always been empowered to review the constitutionality and the legality of what the other branches of government do. Now, if they said we're going to appeal this, that's fine. That's kind of what they said in the first term. But now Trump, realizing that the judiciary is really the main obstacle, he has Congress, he has all of the Republican Party bending their knee to his whims. So the judiciary is the last thing right now with any teeth to stop what Trump wants to do. And so now they're entering this phase of, instead of saying we're going to appeal and we're going to win, they're trying to delegitimize the federal judiciary so that people will go, yeah, nobody elected those judges. Well, guess what? Nobody ever elects federal judges. They're appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. That's always been. So they've never been elected. So unless you think the federal judiciary has been an illegitimate institution for almost 250 years, that's a stupid argument. But it's to play upon people's instincts, which is sort of the gist of the MAGA movement. which is to play upon the base instincts and the general civics ignorance of the American people, which is to say, yeah, we shouldn't have trans girls playing sports. You can agree with that. Not a big issue at all. 10 women were affected by the recent ruling. You say things like nobody elected these judges, and you go, yeah, this is a democracy. Nobody ever elected those judges. Now, it's a democracy here. It's a constitutional republic whenever you bring up undemocratic things that Republicans do. They always then bust out they go, wait, no, it's a constitutional republic. But they'll say democracy when you're talking about unelected judges. The federal judges are unelected. That they've always been. So that's one of those arguments meant to appeal to sort of our ignorant instincts as far as, yeah, we elected the president. We didn't elect these judges. That's just preying on people's stupidity. And they're willing to do it. Scott Jennings and his ilk, just like, Hawley, Cruz, Vance, these are educated people. These are people who know better, but they also know politically most people don't know better. So they're willing to check what they know, which is why it's more craven and more disgusting that they do know better and they play these shallow games. But the point is, Trump's move now is to both in effect and rhetorically and politically diminish the federal judiciary as an institution, because the first term, they were the only ones who had the power, the constitutional power, to stand in the way of many of his worst things. The Supreme Court, he empowered to help him, and they have. But now there are obviously, Joe Biden nominated more federal judges in one term than anybody ever, passing Trump's record. And there are judges of both parties that have been people of conscience and have defended the law, whether they were Bush appointees, whether they were even Trump appointees. Some of Trump appointees have shut his shit down. So now his last big move, now that he has Congress, now that he has the Supreme Court, and now he has the executive, is to diminish the federal judiciary. And that's what this rhetoric is about. So J.D. Vance will say things like that. And if you called him on it constitutionally and by the text of what he said, he'd say, I said legitimate executive actions. But the vibe you're putting out, you semantics playing douchebag, is that Trump should have the power and that the judges really shouldn't have the ability to call anything he does into question. Even though you're saying legitimate executive action, you're really trying to create the perception of anything Trump does shouldn't be shut down by some unelected judge, which, to reiterate, all the federal judges are unelected as far as I know, at least in terms of district appeals courts and the Supreme Court. And, what guys like Scott Jennings will do on news channels is they will just say stuff like that, like, who even elected these judges? And most Americans, unfortunately, will go, yeah, that makes sense to me. And sure it does. But it's not the system we have. They know it. More Americans need to know it. And that's it for today. That's JL's little judiciary bullshit lesson from what Republicans are trying to do. So right now, the judiciary is holding, but they recognize that that's the last domino to fall before they can start to implement, I guess, like a soft, man-boobed dictatorship. So stay tuned. We'll see how the judiciary holds up, but that's what they're doing. Bye.